Welcome to Fred's 10-Minute Marketing Courses.
Today we are discussing Supercharge Marketing Team with AI. Basics to Know, written by Fred James.
And, if you work in marketing right now, your company is probably paying thousands of dollars for artificial intelligence tools.
Oh, at least thousands.
Right. But I guarantee you're treating them like interns locked in a basement without a Wi-Fi password.
That is a brutally accurate way to put it.
I mean, everyone knows an algorithm can brainstorm a quick campaign idea or write a generic social media post.
Sure, the basic stuff.
But for those of us on the front lines, it still feels like a web-based toy. Like you keep it open in a browser tab, you mess around with it, but it certainly doesn't feel like a reliable integrated coworker yet.
Yeah, and that gap between a browser toy and a functional virtual employee is the central reality check brought forward by Fred James. Because to turn these systems into powerhouses that genuinely accelerate your team's output, marketers have to step completely out of their creative comfort zones.
Which means what exactly?
Well, we have to cross a pretty significant IT divide. We're talking about fundamentally understanding network addresses, managing file permissions, and actually typing commands into a raw terminal.
Oh, look, I'm going to stop you right there. My entire workflow as a frontline marketer is visual.
Right.
I spend my days in Figma, Canva, and social scheduling platforms. Dragging and dropping is fast, it's intuitive. Stepping backward into the 1980s to use a text-based terminal sounds completely counterproductive.
I get that, but
I mean, why on earth would I abandon modern interfaces just to get an algorithm to do its job?
because you have to think about the mechanics of access. Think about a physical corporate environment. You wouldn't hire a brilliant new data analyst, ask them to review your highly confidential to-be sales figures,
No, of course not.
and then just leave them standing out on the sidewalk without a key card to the building.
Okay, that's fair.
The exact same logic applies to a virtual employee. A web-based interface is essentially the sidewalk.
Ah, I see where you're going.
Yeah, if your automated agent cannot securely access the specific internal files it needs to do the heavy lifting, well, its utility is artificially capped.
So we're moving past the concept of the algorithm itself and looking at the literal digital infrastructure required to support it.
Exactly.
Let's make this highly concrete for anyone listening to our deep dive. Put yourself in this scenario. It's the weekend, you're sitting at a Starbucks, enjoying a coffee,
Sounds nice so far.
and suddenly your boss calls with a massive emergency. You need to immediately process several multi-gigabyte, high-definition video files for a brand new, unreleased consumer electronics product.
Oh,
Let's say it's a premium health tracking smartwatch.
a classic panic-inducing frontline bottleneck.
Total panic. Because if I try to process those massive video assets on my lightweight coffee shop laptop, the fans are going to spin up like a jet engine and the machine will crash instantly.
It'll just melt, yeah.
And I also can't just upload those proprietary assets into a generic public AI tool because those web interfaces have zero access to our company's secure intranet.
Right.
Where all the cross-channel marketing reports and approved brand assets live.
And this is precisely why Fred James emphasizes a deep understanding of IP addresses. An IP address functions as a digital house number.
Right.
But you must understand the critical boundary between a public IP and a private IP.
Okay, break that down for me.
A private IP acts like your company's internal phone extension. It usually starts with numbers like 192.168.
Right, the internal network.
Yeah, and if an entity's on the outside sitting on the public internet, they cannot just dial that internal extension. The corporate firewall blocks it entirely to ensure data security.
Which is fantastic for keeping corporate espionage at bay, but absolutely terrible for me sitting in Starbucks trying to render a smartwatch campaign.
Exactly.
Because if the company database only responds to internal network extensions, I am completely locked out of using my powerful office desktop to run these intensive AI tasks remotely.
Right. So to bridge that gap, you implement a tool called Tailscale.
Tail, okay.
Yeah. Tailscale functions as a virtual master key. It creates a secure, encrypted tunnel straight across the public internet.
Oh, wow. So even from the coffee shop.
Even from the coffee shop. Even though you are connected to a highly vulnerable public Wi-Fi network, Tailscale tricks your laptop and your heavy-duty office desktop into believing they are sitting right next to each other on the exact same private internal network.
That's incredible.
You essentially project your secure office environment outward to wherever you are in the world.
Okay, securing that virtual master key makes total sense for infrastructure.
Yeah.
But once I am remotely connected to that powerhouse office machine, Fred James insists we bypass the mouse entirely and use the command line terminal.
He does, yes.
And you still haven't convinced me why I need to ditch the graphical interface. Why can't I just click on a folder to point the AI to my files?
Because a graphical user interface, the mouse, the glowing folders, the colorful icons, that is an illusion constructed specifically for human eyes and human motor skills.
An illusion.
Yeah, powerful, customized automation scripts do not have eyes. If an interface update moves a button 2 pixels to the left, a visual automation breaks entirely.
Oh, I don't think about that.
To orchestrate complex tasks with a virtual employee reliably, you need to communicate directly with the underlying operating system. You do that through absolute text commands in the terminal.
Okay, framed as an issue of mechanical reliability, I can see the argument. But looking at a black screen with a blinking cursor is incredibly unintuitive for a creative professional. It feels like hacking.
Well, Fred James uses a fantastic mechanistic analogy to demystify this. Stop viewing the terminal as a cryptic hacker environment. Picture it as a massive, completely dark file room.
A dark file room, okay.
When you open that terminal, you rely on a few basic navigational commands. For instance, you type PWAWD. That stands for Print Working Directory.
PWD, got it.
Mechanically, it is the equivalent of you shouting into the dark room, what specific floor and aisle am I standing in right now?
Okay, identifying my current location is straightforward enough.
From there, you might type ELS on a Mac or Linux system, or JIR on a Windows PC. That command operates as a flashlight.
A flashlight?
Yeah, it illuminates your immediate surroundings and returns a plain text list of every single file and folder in that specific directory.
I like that. So I flip on the flashlight, I scan the list, and I locate the raw video file I need for the smartwatch campaign. But what if the asset I need is sitting in an entirely different department's folder?
Then you utilize the CD command, meaning change directory.
Right.
That acts as the physical movement of walking through a door into the next room. You navigate room by room until your flashlight reveals the exact target files.
And then what?
Once you're standing in the correct directory, you use an execution command like Python 3 followed by a script name. That is the moment you hand the files over to your virtual employee and initiate the actual work.
Oh, wow.
It's not complex programming. It's simply direct, unambiguous navigation.
Walking through a dark file room with a flashlight really strips away the intimidation factor. So we have our secure tail-scale highway built, and we know how to navigate the infrastructure natively. Let's transition to the actual algorithm running on this highway.
Let's do it.
Fred James specifically highlights Claude, developed by Anthropic. In a market flooded with algorithms, what is the mechanical advantage here?
The defining architectural advantage is that Claude operates through 3 distinct gears, or modes. You have chat, cowork, which is abbreviated as CWork and code.
Chat, CWork, and code.
Right. Shifting between these gears changes the fundamental capabilities of the system. Chat mode is the baseline. Think of it as keeping the AI safely in a cage. You stand on the outside, you feed it a prompt through the bars, and it hands you an isolated text response back.
Basically the web toy we discussed earlier. It is completely isolated and cannot mechanically interact with my environment.
Exactly. But then you shift into the second gear, cowork or CWork mode. This drops the cage and effectively gives the AI hands. It gains the mechanical ability to reach out and manipulate your local files directly. It can open a sprawling financial spreadsheet, analyze the data, and rewrite a local text file based on its findings.
Wait. Giving an invisible algorithm the hands to touch my local file system sounds like a recipe for catastrophic data loss. What prevents it from getting confused and formatting my entire hard drive?
Well, a critical component of implementing CWork mode is establishing strict directory boundaries. You never give this mode administrative access to your root system.
So you fence it in.
You confine it to a highly specific project folder. If you create a sandbox folder exclusively for the smartwatch campaign, the system is physically incapable of reaching outside those boundaries to access your personal tax documents or core operating files.
Okay, that makes me feel better.
Okay.
So chat is the cage, CWRK gives it hands with a fence around it. What does the third gear do?
Code mode acts as a complete manual override. In this highest gear, the AI possesses hands to manipulate local files, but it also gains an external connection to the open internet.
Oh, wow. So it can go outside.
Right. It can autonomously write a script, deploy it to scrape competitor pricing data from live-to-see retail websites, parse that data, and compile it into a local report on your machine without human intervention.
The automation potential is massive. But anyone who has used these systems knows there is a glaring operational trap here. By
Oh.
default, these three modes function as completely parallel universes.
Yeah, that is a huge problem.
Because they do not share a persistent background state, the AI suffers from severe instantaneous amnesia every single time you switch gears.
Exactly. This amnesia destroys operational efficiency. The user is forced to re-explain the entire context of their business every single time they open a new session.
Let's apply this to the smartwatch launch. Suppose I am targeting a 2C retail audience in the morning, aiming to build hype on a social platform.
Okay.
I open a chat session, and because it lacks fundamental context about our premium brand guidelines, it generates copy using ridiculous teenage internet slang.
Which is awful.
Right, so I close that session. In the afternoon, I switch into co-work mode to format a highly technical press release for our to-be enterprise distribution partners. The algorithm has completely wiped its memory, forgets the product identity entirely, and writes the press release like a stuffy 19th century academic. The brand tone wildly oscillates.
And the time you waste meticulously correcting those tonal oscillations entirely negates the speed advantage of using AI in the first place.
Exactly.
So to engineer this amnesia out of the system, you must cease treating the algorithm like a generic, disposable utility. You must formally onboard it into your organization.
Formal onboarding for an AI.
Yes, Claude features architecture called projects and memory designed to solve this exact bottleneck.
We are essentially constructing a dedicated, persistent virtual war room.
You initialize a specific project for the smartwatch launch. Within that isolated environment, the memory function acts as a persistent contextual anchor. It retains your brand's unique tone of voice, your preferred structural formatting, and the historical collaboration habits you have established across all subsequent sessions.
Okay, the war room is persistent, but how do we dictate the actual labor? Fred James points to two foundational plain text files that act as the operating brain of this virtual employee: agent.md and skill.md.
Right. And for listeners unfamiliar with the extension, MD stands for Markdown. It is a highly simplified markup language that formats text using basic keyboard symbols rather than hidden software code.
So no weird Microsoft Word formatting issue.
Exactly. It strips away complex fonts, invisible styling tags, and proprietary formatting that regularly confuse algorithmic parsers.
Keeping the data clean and unambiguous. So the agent.md file functions as the official job description. In this file, I'm explicitly defining the algorithm's persona. I would write out, you are a senior, highly experienced public relations specialist for a premium consumer electronics brand. Your core directive is to communicate advanced technological sophistication while maintaining a lifestyle-focused, approachable tone.
Perfect. You establish the identity and the baseline psychological approach. The companion file, skill.md, functions as the standard operating procedure.
The SOP.
Right. If the agent file dictates who the employee is, the skill file dictates the rigid, step-by-step mechanics of exactly how a specific task must be executed.
This shifts my entire perspective from being a frontline creative to acting as a systems manager. Writing a skill.md file requires entirely abandoning the old paradigm of prompting.
It really does.
Think about how we usually interact with these tools. We dump a messy 45-minute cross-departmental meeting transcript into a chat box and lazily type, "Please summarize this."
And that lazy prompting guarantees unpredictable variance. On Monday, the algorithm might return a concise bulleted list. On Tuesday, faced with a similar prompt, it might generate 3 dense, unreadable paragraphs.
And you cannot build reliable corporate infrastructure on unpredictable variance.
Absolutely not.
So to eliminate that variance, the skill.md file must be ruthlessly mechanistic. Instead of asking for a summary, I engineer a rigid workflow.
Right. Give me an example.
I would write, Step 1, parse the transcript and extract the 3 most critical strategic decisions. Step 2, identify every actionable item. Step 3, format those actionable items into a strict markdown table containing exactly 3 columns labeled task, owner, and deadline.
Brilliant. And the initial friction of writing that highly specific procedure is a one-time cost. Once that logic is codified in the skill.md file, the virtual employee executes it flawlessly with 0 structural variance every single time you feed it a new transcript.
The sheer relief of never having to manually untangle who committed to what in a chaotic product sync is worth the setup time alone. We have established the secure infrastructure, we cured the operational amnesia, and we codified the training manuals. Let's observe this architecture executing real-world frontline tasks.
Good idea. Fred James provides several compelling use cases. Let's analyze the virtual employee acting as a presentation and copywriting assistant.
Okay, let's hear it.
Suppose you provide your automated agent with the raw, highly technical engineering specifications for the smartwatch. The battery degradation curves, the biometric sensor array data, the aerospace-grade casing materials.
Incredibly dense data that normally takes hours to manually translate into consumer-facing benefits.
Exactly. But because of the contextual grounding in the agent.md file, the system dynamically reframes that raw data. When instructed to generate a newsletter segment for fitness enthusiasts, it aggressively pushes the biometric tracking accuracy to the forefront.
Oh, nice.
And when instructed to generate a to-be pitch deck for corporate wellness programs, it pivots entirely to highlight battery longevity and bulk fleet management integration.
Eliminating the manual context switching is powerful, but Fred James mentions this workflow connects directly to visual design platforms like Canva. How does plain text actually bridge the gap into a visual presentation?
This is where the structural rigidity of the skill.md file becomes critical. The file forces the AI to output its copy in a highly structured data format, often JSON or strict Markdown.
Okay.
Through an API, an application programming interface, which is essentially a digital bridge, allowing independent software platforms to exchange data, the structured output is mapped directly to Canva's architecture.
Wow. Okay.
The API sees headline X in the data and autonomously injects that exact text into the designated title layer of your visual template.
It maps the underlying data to the visual layers automatically. You move from raw engineering specs to a fully populated, beautifully designed presentation draft without ever manually copying and pasting a single line of text.
Pretty incredible, right?
It is. Now, the second use case tackles an area that causes immense friction in global marketing: the multilingual and cross-cultural assistant. As someone managing global campaigns, nothing damages brand equity faster than cold machine-translated copy.
Right, because standard translation tools swap words, literally.
Exactly. But they completely strip away the cultural resonance, leaving the brand sounding robotic and disconnected.
Well, the skill.md framework engineers a solution to that exact problem. You explicitly forbid the algorithm from executing a literal word-for-word translation.
Or you just tell it not to.
Right. Instead, you instruct the system to analyze the underlying psychological appeal and emotional intent of the original source text.
So if I am adapting a campaign targeting B2B tech executives in the United States, how does the system process that directive?
The SOP instructs the virtual employee to cross-reference the original emotional intent against the current cultural context of Silicon Valley business vernacular.
Oh, that's smart.
It entirely rewrites the core message, utilizing the specific idioms, the professional pacing, and the industry standard vocabulary that natively resonates with that highly specific demographic. It ensures your premium brand positioning feels culturally localized rather than artificially translated.
Whether the target is a B2B enterprise client in San Francisco or a 2C retail consumer in Tokyo, the output sounds like it was crafted by a native industry insider.
Exactly.
But implementing this level of autonomous power in a corporate environment must require severe managerial oversight. How do teams integrate this without triggering a major operational disaster?
Fred James structures a very pragmatic three-step rollout. Step 1 requires a brutal audit of your team's weekly workflow. You must identify the repetitive, high-friction bottlenecks that drain creative energy.
Find the pain points.
Step 2 involves extracting the human logic used to solve those bottlenecks and translating it into the rigid skill.md format. And step 3 is seamless integration. You do not force your team to learn a complex new software platform. You utilize APIs to embed these automated skills directly into the daily tools they already inhabit, whether that is Notion, Google Docs, or Obsidian.
Start with a small, painful bottleneck, codify the logic, and integrate it silently into the background. That limits the disruption.
Exactly.
But we have to address the red lines. What are the catastrophic risks of putting an algorithm in the highest gear?
Data security presents the most immediate threat, particularly when utilizing code mode with an active internet connection. Imagine a scenario where an overworked junior marketer accidentally copies the proprietary, unreleased CAD blueprints for the next-generation smartwatch
Oh, no.
and pastes them into a public-facing AI tool to generate promotional teaser copy.
That is a nightmare scenario. That proprietary data could instantly be absorbed into the training data set of a global algorithm, effectively leaking trade secrets to competitors before the product is even officially announced.
Precisely. Organizations must establish immovable boundaries, defining what internal intellectual property is strictly forbidden from ever interacting with internet-enabled models.
What's the second risk?
The second critical risk is the phenomenon of algorithmic hallucinations. This occurs when the system confidently fabricates data that is entirely fictitious.
It does not simply return an error message. It lies with absolute grammatical conviction.
Exactly the danger. Suppose you instruct your virtual employee to aggregate and summarize a dense quarterly sales report, and the algorithm hallucinates a highly optimistic, completely fabricated conversion rate.
Oh man, if I fail to manually verify that data and I stand up in front of the board of directors and present that fake conversion rate, the board is not going to direct their anger at the agent.md file. The human manager me bears the entirety of the professional fallout.
Right. The accountability remains entirely human. Furthermore, there are significant legal ambiguities surrounding copyright, particularly regarding purely AI-generated visual assets in commercial advertising. Organizations must navigate those legal frameworks with extreme caution.
Which brings us to the underlying philosophical question of this entire discussion. If we dedicate our time to architecting these highly efficient virtual employees that can translate cultural nuance, synthesize complex meeting transcripts, and instantaneously map data to visual presentations.
Okay.
Wait, let me rephrase that without trailing off.
Yeah.
What exactly is the enduring value of the human marketer? Are we actively engineering our own obsolescence?
Fred James provides a highly clarifying perspective on this existential concern. And artificial intelligence, regardless of how flawlessly you configure its skill.md file, remains a mechanism optimized for velocity and volume.
Right.
It can effortlessly generate 50 different marketing headlines in 3 minutes.
But generating 50 headlines is simply an exercise in volume. It does not guarantee that a single one of them possesses actual resonance.
That is the core distinction. It requires a human being's frontline market intuition, developed emotional intelligence, and genuine aesthetic taste to review those 50 generated options and identify the single headline that will authentically compel a consumer to feel something and take action.
We architect the systems to execute the repetitive mechanics of how the work gets done, but human beings retain the ultimate judgment over what actually matters to other human beings. The algorithm can replicate our logic, but it cannot replicate our taste.
Exactly. By outsourcing the mechanical execution, human managers free up their cognitive bandwidth to focus entirely on high-level strategy and judgment.
Think about your own workflow as we wrap this up. Fred Jane leaves us with 3 immediate, highly actionable steps to begin this transition. Action 1. Stop relying exclusively on limited web interfaces. Install Tailscale on your devices, establish that secure tunnel, and experience the power of commanding your main workstation remotely. Bridge that IT divide.
Right. Action 2. Cease treating the algorithm like an amnesiac. Initialize a dedicated Claude project for your most critical ongoing campaign. Utilize the memory feature to upload your foundational brand guidelines and observe the immediate increase in quality when the system actually retains your organizational context.
Action 3. Identify the single repetitive administrative task that drains the most energy from your week. Perhaps it's untangling those chaotic cross-departmental transcripts and force yourself to engineer a ruthlessly precise skill.md file to automate it. Reclaim those lost hours.
Executing those 3 steps will fundamentally restructure the efficiency of your marketing operations.
And to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over. Fast forward 2 or 3 years into the future. If half of your team's daily marketing output is being autonomously generated and formatted by AI agents strictly following the logic in their skill.md files, well, will your most critical competitive advantage as a frontline marketer shift entirely away from your ability to write clever copy and become almost entirely dependent on how masterfully you can manage a network of algorithms?
Thank you for listening. If you have any thoughts on today's episode or marketing topics, feel free to leave a comment below the video. This is Fred's 10-minute marketing courses. See you next time.